This video will go over how volume and open interest work. Volume is widely understood, but open interest is a concept that is widely misunderstood. Volume, as it pertains to options, is defined as the total number of contracts that have been traded on any given day. Volume is a metric that resets daily, updates intraday, and can only increase. Any transaction results in an increase of volume. Whether you buy to open a contract or sell to close, every contract that changes hands counts as one volume. I need to take a second to mention that you need to know how buy to open, BTO, sell to open, STO, buy to close, BTC, and sell to close, STC. You need to know how all of these work in order to fully understand how volume and open interest interact with each other. I'm going to put links in the video description to tweets of mine that provide education as well as additional context that will relate to the contents of this video. So please check that out. Okay, so back to volume. So volume updates intraday. Every contract traded is one volume. Trading 10 contracts in a singular trade counts as 10 volume. Here are just some quick examples. On July 11th, ticker Reddit saw 26,183 call volume. The Reddit 72.5 strike September expiration call saw 1,035 contracts traded. Now let's talk about open interest. A simple definition of open interest is the number of existing contracts for any equity or contract. Earlier I mentioned that volume is a metric that resets daily, updates intraday, and can only increase. Open interest is the opposite in pretty much every regard. Open interest does not reset daily, but rather changes as new contracts are opened and existing contracts are closed, and it updates once per day. Updated open interest values are made available on the Unusual Whales platform at around 6:45 a.m. on trading days. Other platforms may not make this data available until the open of the new session, which could put you at an information disadvantage. Examples are best to learn with, so I've prepared an imaginary scenario as well as gathered some past examples of flow for us to look at. The first example is this fictitious ABC 100 strike call. So going into Monday, the 100 strike call had 0 open interest. On Monday, Jack bought one ABC 100 call. No other activity took place throughout the session. On Tuesday morning, the open interest went up by 1, which represents the single contract that was opened on Monday. So now we're going to reference the bottom half of the screen for this next part. So in Tuesday's session, Jack decided to put up his contract for sale. He could place an order at the bid and get filled right away, but he decides to place an order at the asking price. Joe decides that he's in the market for a 100 strike call. He puts an order at the ask, which is filled by Jack's open order. Assuming no other activity takes place throughout the session, the volume for the day ends at 1. On Wednesday morning, the open interest would remain at 1. It has remained unchanged even though one party has closed their position and another party has opened a position. This is a mechanic that confuses many people. Many beginning flow traders are smart enough to observe that a whale has purchased 8,000 call options, which creates 8,000 new open interest, but then they stop looking at the contract's volume and instead become fixated on the open interest. We need to look at both volume and open interest to fully track options flow. So I've got an example right here with a little write-up. You can follow along. So we saw a little over 8,000 volume on the Disney 115 strike calls on May 1st. Not shown, but this volume was a singular trade and thus a single trader. So given the large increase in open interest, we know that the trader held their position overnight. Open interest remains steady with some volume over the next few days, which tells us that the whale is holding either the bulk or the entirety of their position. On May 11th, the same contract saw over 8,000 volume, not shown, but this was a singular trade and thus probably a single trader, and thus likely our whale from May 1st. The next day, open interest decreased by a little over 3,300. Open interest remained relatively high at 5,000. A trader who is only observing the open interest value may believe that the May 1st trader still has a position 5,000 contracts strong. But in reality, the original trader has closed their position, and thus any bullish thesis originating from this flow has now been invalidated. There are 5,000 contracts still in existence, but they are now owned by different unknown parties. Here's a recent example of the same mechanics at play. 16,000 or so Tesla calls opened on July 1st. Similar volumes on July 11th, which resulted in a large decrease in open interest. It is highly likely that the July 1st trader has closed their entire position. Whoever their original counterparty is still the counterparty to some other person or persons, but as with the previous example, the original trader is all out. Earlier, we defined open interest as the number of existing contracts. Let's flesh this definition out a little further. Open interest is the number of existing contracts, both long and short. Examples of long options: you buy a call, you buy a put. Example of a short option: you write a covered call against 100 shares, or you write a cash secured put. If you're unfamiliar with short options, the simplest way I can put it is someone who buys an option wants the contract premium to increase. Someone who is short an option wants the contract price to decrease. Take these BlackRock 720 strike puts. 2,500 traded at the bid against an open interest of 33. This trader was short, not long, these puts. The premium losing value is exactly what this trader is looking for. Someone who only observed an increase in open interest on these puts and decided to buy them would have gotten burned. Here's a high-profile example of tracking volume and open interest over the course of a couple weeks. Prior to Roaring Kitty disclosing his GameStop options position, I noticed that there was unusual activity into a particular contract. I obviously had no idea who it was, but it was clear that something was brewing. Multiple days of repeated ask-side activity, followed by large increases in open interest. On June 2nd, with the open interest finishing the May 31st session at 144,000, he disclosed a 120,000 contract position. His position was so large that it was incredibly easy to track, which I did and provided live updates for. An easy way to think about tracking a large whale is as follows. So let's say that there are 10 people in a bar. A group of 100 people walk in. If a pack of 25 people then leave the bar, the likelihood that the 25 people belong to the party of 100 is incredibly high. If the total number of people who leave the bar increases to 100, then it's very likely that the group of 100 that initially entered the bar has now all left the bar. Roaring Kitty's GameStop position was unwound on June 12th and 13th and was incredibly easy to track. I mentioned earlier that a platform not rendering the updated open interest value until the start of a new session puts you at a disadvantage, and here's what I mean by that. On July 9th, we saw a trader opening at the ask, 4,000 plus hood 27 strike calls expiring in November. The position lost some value throughout the session, but was held overnight as shown by the increase in open interest. The next morning, the same contract saw a trade of equal size. The trade took place at the ask. It'd be very natural to think that this trader doubled their position. So given that this trader's volume was close to the only volume throughout the rest of the day, any change in open interest or lack thereof that takes place the next morning will effectively be entirely due to this trader's doing. Open interest dropped from 5,300 to 2,700. Given such a steep decrease in open interest, it is clear that the July 9 trader closed their position on the 10th. Knowing this information at 6:30 Eastern, 3:30 for you West Coasters, is obviously quite valuable in allowing for pre-market preparation. Now, here's a little bonus factoid that just came into play. A trade at or closer to the ask is not necessarily a buy, nor is a trade at the bid necessarily a sell, as we just saw with the hood calls. We saw two large candles both at the ask, however, one of them was a closing trade. Here are two examples to reinforce that. Nancy Pelosi recently disclosed a purchase of 20 AVGO 800 strike calls expiring in 2025. Her trade is shown here and is filled closer to the bid. Another example, the CEO of Scorpio Tankers disclosed a purchase of 60 strike September call options back in February. When looking at the options tape, the trades were filled largely at or closer to the bid. There are honestly quite a few more things to consider, but in the interest of keeping your attention span going, these videos can't be too long. I think that I went over a lot of really good examples of how to look at both volume and open interest in this video. Please continue to educate yourself as well, as knowing how to interpret volume and open interest is quite a useful skill. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. Make sure to check out our changelog to stay up to date with all platform updates, of which there are many. It helped the channel a lot if you subscribed, liked, and/or left a comment. Feel free to ask any questions about the contents of this video, and I'll come by and answer them as I can.